Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to PsychoBible, battling about psychology and theology. So, I wanted to do a video about this one video that a friend sent to me back in early June. And I've been wanting to do a commentary on it for a while now, and I just now have the time. And this was sent to me June 8th, and the video was recorded June 5th. It's a video that was posted on World Star Hip Hop. It was actually a video by David Jones Media. It's featuring Kimberly Jones. She's an author. I don't know what she's written. I didn't really look much into her history. But my friend, who we went to the same college together, but we're on different ends politically and more and more ideologically. And after the riots, after George Floyd's death, I was very vocal. I mean, I've been vocal all along against Black Lives Matter and the destruction they cause when they protest, but the protests quickly turned to riots. So we have discussions every now and then, not very often. And so she sent me a private message with a link to this video, and this is what she said. Just wanted to share this video because from the anger and pain in her voice to the perspective she gives, it's worth a watch. Of course, there are people out there whose main purpose is to destroy, and in many places they found them to be instigators and out-of-town people, not protesters. But for some of them, it might shed a light on the why. And so I watched the video, and I told her I don't really have the time at the moment to give the video the commentary it deserves, maybe tomorrow. So the next day, after watching it, I gave her my thoughts. Now, I'm just going to play the video and stop it periodically to give my thoughts as I go through, because I did not give her all of my thoughts. But the little bit I gave her, I'll show you in a bit. So I'll provide the link to the website where it's posted, and there's also, you can find it on YouTube as well. So you can watch it in its entirety without my interruptions for yourself. But let's just get into it.
So I've been seeing a lot of things talking about people making commentary. Interestingly enough, the ones I've noticed that have been making the commentary are wealthy black people making the commentary about we should not be rioting, we should not be looting, we should not be tearing up our own communities. And then there's been an argument of the other side of we should be hitting them in the pocket. We should be focusing on the blackout days where we don't spend money. But, you know, I feel like we should do both. And I feel like I support both. And I'll tell you why.
Okay, so let me just stop her right here and just point out, just make it very clear that she is not going to be presenting an argument for protests, as in like marching down the street in an organized manner, maybe actually presenting some actionable policy change. There are some, I think, that can be made. They're not going to be the ones that they actually want, such as dissolving public sector unions that end up helping protect bad cops. And all of that would mean bad teachers. But no, we don't want to get rid of the unions, because actually the unions are big funding arms for the Democratic Party. So that's one solution I think that would be most practical, that you won't see these protesters advocate for, because they don't want to completely bite off the hand that feeds them. So anyway, let me digress from there. All right, so she is not presenting an argument for what are the causes, what are the arguments that the protesters, those who are marching and have a grievance. That's what the purpose of a protest should be, to argue against a particular policy decision or a trend that's happening, and bring up awareness of something, but then actually present a solution, a change that you want to see happen, a new policy. Like the civil rights movement was to bring awareness and then pass a civil rights act. What are they actually arguing for in these protests? Is it for a particular policy change? And is there an act, a bill that they're pushing for? Or are they trying to call for the enforcement consistent enforcement of an existing act? Is there actual injustice, or is there partiality being practiced that is treating them unfairly? If that's the case, then yes, you have something to present. Here's our grievance. This needs to change. We have not been hearing that during these protests. The main mantra we've heard is defund the police. Okay, and most of it has been the changes they want are mostly ideological. It's very much religious. Kneel with us, admit your privilege, and dismantle systemic racism, but you don't hear much as far as policy changes. So, anyway, let me get back into it. So, what she is presenting here, though, is not a defense of the protesters, at least not the actual peaceful protesters. We've heard the word protester being misused all year long. No, she is calling for acceptance, or she's trying to argue on behalf of the rioters and the looters. She's saying, well, we could do two things. If there's a grievance about racism in our country, we can boycott the blackout days, that's what that is, where all black people and their allies who agree that there's racial injustice, we can choose to stop shopping and really hit people financially and show how important our spending is. Or we can just destroy property and burn things and steal from people and cause civil unrest. And she's saying that we should do both. She's not just saying she's okay with both, but that we should do both. And my friend, mostly an online friend, from my Christian college days, college educated, who should know better, is trying to tell me that this video helps explain her side more. Okay, so let's get into it.
I support both. I support both because when you have a civil unrest like this, there are three types of people in the streets. There are the protesters, there are the rioters, and there are the looters. The protesters are there because they actually care about what is happening in the community. They want to raise their voices, and they are there strictly to protest. You have the rioters who are angry, who are anarchists, who really just want to up, and that's what they're going to do regardless. And then you have the looters, and the looters almost exclusively are just there to do that, to loot. Now, people are like, well, what?
All right, did you catch that? Okay, she just said the looters are there just to do that, to loot. Okay, so she's admitting that looters just are thieves. Okay, but then listen what she says next.
What did you gain? Well, what did you get from looting? I think that as long as we're focusing on the what, we're not focusing on the why. And that's my issue with that. As long as we're focusing on what they're doing, we're not focusing on why they're doing. And some people are like, well, those aren't people who are legitimately angry about what's happening. Those are people who just want to get stuff. Okay, well then, let's go with that. Let's say that's what it is.
So what did she just do? That's called doublespeak. On one hand, she's saying they're just there to loot. They're just there to steal. So she's now going to say that, well, they're not just there to loot. They have a legitimate cause for looting. So now she's talking about both sides of the mouth. On one hand, she's admitting they're just there to steal. But now she's going to say that they have some justification. Okay. This is what's crazy about 2020, is now one of the things that used to be universally understood, that stealing things is wrong. And now what we're seeing is, nope, guess you can make a case for why it's okay to steal. So what's her case? Let's get into it.
Ask ourselves why in this country in 2020 the financial gap between poor blacks and the rest of the world is at such a distance that people feel like they're
poor blacks and the rest of the world. Which rest of the world? You mean this rest of the world that doesn't have clean water, that doesn't have running water, that doesn't have basic sewage. I mean, this rest of the world that doesn't have freedom of religion, that is sent to concentration camps or re-education camps in China. Which part of the world are they richer than or poorer than? Okay.
Only hope and only opportunity to get some of the things that we flaunt and flash in front of them all the time is to walk through.
The things that we flaunt and flash in front of them all the time. And what are those things? What are the things they go and steal? You don't see anyone busting into a university to get an education. This video was posted on World Star Hip Hop. All right, let's talk about hip hop culture. Have you watched any hip hop music videos? All it is flaunting the bling, the clothes, the going out clubbing, all the alcohol they drink, and all the girls that they're with. Okay, who's the one doing all the flaunting? All right, all the stuff that they're trying to get and flaunting by what? You mean advertisements? Are you that duped by the advertising industry? The advertising industry, their whole goal is to make you think that you need something that you don't really need. Like, everyone should know this by now. Are you telling me that you're that easily hooked by it? So if you're that easily swayed by everyone, maybe you need to like unplug a bit and like become your own person and realize, well, what is it that I actually value? And this plays right into what I'm going to say when it comes to the collectivist mindset, is this idea that I need all this stuff, not because it's what you actually desire as a person, but it's because what your subculture or your culture at large is promoting all the time, that you think that's what you need in order to fit in order to be accepted into the culture. I'm not even sure how many of you actually believe that you need those things. I think if questioned, most people would be like, I don't really need it, but I want it. And if I can get it, I'll take it without any remorse. That's an indictment against some parenting for sure. All right. I'm going to circle back to that for sure later. Let's keep going.
Through a broken glass window and get it. That they are so hopeless that getting that necklace, getting that TV, getting that change, getting that bed, getting that phone, whatever it is that they're going to get, is that in that moment when the riots happen and if they present an opportunity of looting, that's their only opportunity to get it. We need to be questioning that why. Why are people that poor? Why are people that broke? Why
are they that poor? I don't see society-wide scale, in the U.S., poor people of any race that is so far behind that they need to steal in order to get the basic necessities of life. We have enough social programs already that there shouldn't be a reason anyone is starving to death in the U.S. And she'll admit, she doesn't quite say it, but she pretty much admits, yeah, they're not starving, but there's a desire for more.
Why are people that food insecure, that clothing insecure?
See what she say? She doesn't say they're starving. She doesn't say they're naked and they don't have clothes. She says they're food insecure, that they're clothing insecure. So I don't know where she came with the idea to use those terms, but it's actually very manipulative and actually very telling. All right, so this is something I always bring up when I talk to people about our greatest longings. That I've brought this up in multiple other videos about our 7 areas of longings. You got the longing for safety and survival, for peace and harmony, love and belonging, identity and significance, and or honor, for productivity and purpose, and for freedom and fun, and for wisdom and understanding. All right, those are the 7 areas of longing. And the reality is, just as the scripture says, the rain falls on the just and the unjust. That some of us are simply blessed with more opportunity or more ability or ease of obtaining some degree of wealth in any of those areas. So wealth not just meaning money. So some of us are just healthier. So our ability to survive, the need to meet that survival longing and need is more easily met. Some of us are just naturally healthier. Some of us have disabilities. Some of us have chronic illnesses. Some of us have parents who have those sort of issues, and so they're in constant need of being cared for. And some of us are more good looking, and so maybe it's easy for them to be accepted. Some of us are just really good social graces, and so making friends is easier for them, so that love and belonging need comes easier. Some of us are very well able-bodied, and some of us are not so able-bodied, so the productivity and purpose may come easier for others than for another group of people or individuals. Okay? Now here's the deal, though. When you put your identity or worth into the fulfillment of any of these areas, then whether you are really good at it and you maximize fulfillment in a certain area of longing, or if you struggle in that area, you're still going to struggle with insecurity. So whether you have pride about your success in an area or shame about your lack of success in an area, there will always be insecurity, because these longings are meant to show us ultimately that we cannot fulfill our own longings ourselves. See, before the fall, these were the blessings of our unity with the Father, with God. After the fall, these blessings that just came with being in right relationship with God now became longings. But our ultimate longing, our ultimate area of fulfillment is to be united with God. And when we think that these blessings now become our greatest needs, we're losing sight of what ultimately fulfills us. It isn't our wealth. It isn't our acceptance and approval by others. It isn't the amount of pleasure we experience in this life. Those are just tastes of the benefits that come from the ultimate union with God. And so if we only focus on those areas of longing, we will be perpetually insecure. Even the most safe when it comes to wealth, and that gives you a lot of ability to fulfill productivity and a sense of purpose and power. And you may be one of the wealthiest people, but what, and I quote this often, what did John D. Rockefeller say when he was asked, how much money is enough? And his answer was, just a little bit more. You'll never be fully satisfied. You'll always have some insecurity. And even if you're the wealthiest person, there's still going to come with that. If that's where you're putting your security in, then you will be insecure, because deep down you'll understand something can happen at any moment and I'll lose it all. So whenever your security is in something that is finite, something that is temporal, that is of this world but not in eternity, in connection with God, you will be insecure. Whether we're talking about food insecure or clothing insecure, there will be insecurity. So right here, this shows me one of the main components of her worldview that she is presenting. And it is a very materialistic and temporal worldview that only sees this life as what matters. Okay, let's keep going.
Secure, that they feel like their only shot, that they are shooting their shot by walking through a broken glass window to get what they need. And then people want to talk about, well, there's plenty of people who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and got it on their own. Why can't they do that? Let me explain to you something about economics in America. And I'm so glad that as a child I got an opportunity to spend time at Push, where they taught me this, is that we must never forget that economics was the reason that black people were brought to this country. We came to do the agricultural work in the South and the textile work in the North. Do you understand that? That's what we came to do. We came to do the agricultural work in the South and the textile work in the North. Now, if I right now decided that...
She just brought up, okay, here's the history, but now she says, right now, if I wanted to play Monopoly with you, okay? So let's see the contrast here as she goes forward with what she says about being an individual versus being part of a collective.
That I wanted to play Monopoly with you. And for 400 rounds of playing Monopoly, I didn't allow you to have any money. I didn't allow you to have anything on the board. I didn't allow for you to have anything. And then we played another 50 rounds of Monopoly, and everything that you gained and you earned while you were playing that round of Monopoly was taken from you. That was Tulsa. That was Rosewood. Those are places where we built black economic wealth, where we were self-sufficient, where we owned our stores, where we owned our property, and they burned them to the ground. So that's 450 years. So for 400 rounds of Monopoly, you don't get to play at all. Not only do you not get to play, you have to play on the behalf of the person that you're playing against. You have to play and make money and earn wealth for them, and then you have to turn it over to them. So then for 50 years, you finally get a little bit and you're allowed to play.
All right. She's talking about Monopoly. All right. But she's not actually talking about if she were to play Monopoly, if she were to try to gain her own wealth and sort of make it in this life. She's getting into it as if she's lived in the U.S. from the time of slavery till now. So you see the collectivist mindset there, that she is not her own individual. She is only a rep of a collective, that she is just as much a slave as one of her ancestors, that their experiences are now her own. And so she can't view it as, well, where's she actually at starting? She was born, well, she looks like she's probably my own age. So she was probably born in the 80s. And at the time when we were probably the least racist in this country. And at least race conscious. 80s and 90s. Like, who are the top stars? I grew up when the top movie star was Will Smith. And no one thought twice about it. And it's suddenly in the, like halfway through Obama's presidency, race became the biggest issue. And it's like suddenly now we're the most racist country in the world. And black people can't make it. And I'm like, what? I grew up where all the major, or not all of them, but there were a lot of major icons who were black. Whether we're talking about Michael Jordan or Will Smith. And to hear that, wait, now you're telling me that black people are constantly being put down? So this consciousness now has been developed in the universities due to intersectionality, all the identity politics, the critical race theory. There's been this development of this consciousness of our ancestors, and that we are now part of them. Okay? And so now she can't view herself as an individual starting life out at this place where now she actually had as much opportunity as most other people, or at least she had the ability to start developing something for herself. Yeah, I might not have the same opportunities as everyone else. There might be, compared to me, a bunch of other white people who have some inherited wealth. I don't know about that. From what I know, a lot of white people might look like they got a wealth, but a lot of times they've spent too much and they're buried in debt. So we're all slaves to someone right now in the U.S. Because we overspent. And we spent a lot on credit. And so we're not paying things with money we actually have. So, I mean, just listen to Dave Ramsey. So there's a lot of people who are enslaved to a bank out there. But either way, I might be starting out at a bit of a disadvantage compared to other people I grew up with. And I know that's the case. I had a lot of friends who were wealthy compared to me when I was growing up. You know, we were poor. We struggled financially. And we went through some rough years. My parents always strived, though, to make it, and they never had a chip on their shoulder about it. We never blamed a system for it. even though there were some things in the society we were in our town that we lived in, and in the system that were against us. We lost jobs because of our last name. We faced discrimination, but we never just sat around and blamed the system for years and years that went prior to us even existing on this planet of oppression. We're like, okay, where are we starting off at? Okay, I'm starting off in 1985, and with the ability to, if I work hard enough and I apply myself, I'm going to get ahead. And I'm going to refuse to take any handouts because of my last name. I'm going to refuse any sort of affirmative action thing. I'm not going to apply for any scholarships that are for ethnic minorities or for Hispanics, because I want anything that I earn to be based on my merits. And I believe enough in the system of impartiality that I will make it based on those merits. And I'm not going to make it so that anyone can claim that I was a diversity hire of any sort. That's how I grew up, determined to do that, even to the point where it annoyed my mom, because when I was getting ready to go for college, she was like, you and your integrity, why don't you just apply for some of these Hispanic scholarships? And I'm like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to take money just because I'm Hispanic. No. I'm going to earn my way up there. I'm going to get accepted. I'm going to succeed based on the hard work and the efforts that I put into things. And I've had to overcome some difficulties, and guess what? I'm happy for it. Yeah, I know it's against me at times. I know that there's some employers that might have looked down on me at times, or made assumptions at times just because of my last name. And I know that there's other reasons that other people might look down on me, and sometimes not based on my ethnicity, but based on my Christian beliefs. I've already lost a job opportunity because of my convictions. So I get that. I've been kicked out of school for my convictions. So there are other things to my identity than just my ethnicity, my heritage. So I'm an individual, and I know that there's going to be things I have to get through to succeed in some way, to survive. And I'm not going to get a chip on my shoulder over it either. Because those are opportunities for me to develop perseverance. So, yes, there may be some injustice, and I will fight against injustice when there's actual policy or that is incorrect, or people are not giving me the equality under the law or under the policy that I am deserved. But ultimately, I know that me fighting against that tide, fighting against the policies that might be unjust, is going to make me stronger. So that's a virtue that you just can't be given. That's something that you develop through enduring difficulty. So I don't view myself through this racial identity that, oh, I'm, because of all the years of Hispanics being maligned and overlooked in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where I grew up, where they called Hispanics and Puerto Ricans gravy, a term for lazy good-for-nothings. Because of that prejudice, I'm not going to make it. I've had hundreds of years or decades of my pieces on the game board being burned up, and my Monopoly money being burned. So because of my ancestors' history, I'm not going to make it. No, I looked at, okay, where am I starting off? And what can I do to make something for myself?
Every time that they don't like the way that you're playing, or that you're catching up, or that you're doing something to be self-sufficient, they burn your game.
What it sounds like is someone with schizophrenia. If you ever talk to someone with schizophrenia who's got a delusion of persecution, that their constant thing is someone's out to get them, that they're being hunted or spied on. And I can't, look at the damage. Who taught her this? Who taught her to think this way? And God forbid she has children or others that she is influencing, who she will spread this idea to herself. And it reminds me of back in 2000 or the late 90s when Bush and Gore were running for president. And I was doing a lot of inner city work, and the kids told us that their teachers told them that if Bush gets elected, he's going to send all the black kids back to Africa. This is something a public school teacher told these kids. Like, what a terrible thing to tell them. That's helping to reinforce this victim mentality, this idea that you're not going to make it in this world because there's always some person in power who's going to put you down. That's not going to encourage you to apply yourself and rise above your circumstances. What a terrible thing to believe about not just society, but even about yourself. It helps reinforce this idea that you're helpless against a totalitarian system that is out to get you, when it's simply not true. That's so sad that this is what she believes. She's not even like faking it. She literally believes this. This idea that all black people are despised by all other white people that are in power in some way. That all the power is in the white population, and they hate seeing black people succeed. And that if they see any black people starting to succeed, they will find a way to sabotage them. Now, that might have been true 100 years ago, at the time of Tulsa and Rosewood. Maybe it was true, though, in just particular regions. Maybe there were areas where that wasn't so true. And maybe it was only true among certain parts of the population. But she makes a overgeneralizing statement. Who's they? Is it everyone?
Burn your cards. They burn your monopoly money. And then finally at the release and the onset of that, they allow you to play and they say, okay, now you catch up. Now at this point, the only way you're going to catch up in the game is if the person shares the wealth, correct?
No, that's Marxism. See, this video was early June, right? And look what she says there. Right there. She's making it very clear that they're pushed, that the whole thing is we want to redistribute the income, that you guys share your wealth with us. No, it's not a zero-sum game. We live in a land of opportunity that if you work hard, you can get your own wealth. It might not be the same as everyone else, okay? But it doesn't need to be. All right, but you see right here the Marxist idea of income distribution and of having to take from others to give to others what they have not earned. Okay? Now this was early June, and it was a couple months later we found out that the founders of BLM were trained Marxists. And it was a surprise to everyone, but the clues were there all from the beginning. This should not have been news to anyone. So yeah, they want to bring in a Marxist, a socialist, I don't care which way you cut it, socialist or communist. They want to bring in a system where you'll have the main people who work and produce and others who will receive what the rewards of what others are producing, and that they are off the hook of producing for themselves. Okay? Now, she's about to drop a little bit of reality here. She just doesn't understand it. But keep watching.
But what if every time you share the wealth, then there's psychological warfare against you to say, oh, you're an equal opportunity hire. So
see what she just did there? So, once again, there's that persecution mentality that is psychological warfare. But the reality is, that stigma of you being a diversity hire, or equal opportunity hire, she says, that's just going to be a consequence of using identity-based hiring decisions. Like California with Proposition 16, I think that was what it was, tried to repeal, essentially, the Civil Rights Act for California for government employees that they can hire now based on sex or on race. Use that as a criterion for hiring. Well, that's prejudice. That can allow them to show favor against certain races and for others. Now, it might seem like, well, that's to help counteract decades of injustice and discrimination against an ethnic minority. Maybe, but what if it's used against another minority? like against Asians, like they're doing in places like Harvard. Um, and what makes that right in general? Your your higher ability should be based on your qualifications, not on some arbitrary characteristic like your skin color or your genitalia. So the reality is affirmative action hurts minorities because even if the person was qualified, if there's at least a suspicion that they got the job or they got into that college or university because of their race, then there's going to be a shadow over them. There's going to be some degree of doubt over how qualified they actually were. And so you're actually hurting them long term because others who are going to be looking to hire them, or customers, are not going to feel confident that you're doing the job because you're qualified, but that you might have been a diversity hire. That's just reality, unfortunately. That's why I don't ever want to go to a place that hires based on affirmative action, because I don't want that air of suspicion hanging over me. Like, now, it might not be giving people benefit of the doubt, but it's not exactly irrational to be wondering in the back of your mind, I wonder this person who just got hired really had the qualifications, or they're hired, or they got the edge over other applicants because of their race. Well, when you've got these policies out there that allow for it, it's not unreasonable to think that. It's unfortunate, but that's how things like affirmative action hurt you. But it's not psychological warfare. That's that victim mentality. That's that persecution delusion coming back, that, we're going to allow you to do affirmative action, but then we're going to throw it back in your face. Or maybe that is what the liberals are trying to do. Maybe.
So if I played 400 rounds of Monopoly with you and I had to play and give you every dime that I made.
Once again, you haven't played 400 rounds of Monopoly. Your ancestors played 400 rounds, but you are starting at a different place, and you're not recognizing that. You're not recognizing the opportunity that you have, that you're now starting at a place where the system doesn't have laws that are prejudiced against you. So you're getting yourself hyped about something that you no longer need to be hyped about. You are not your ancestors. You are an individual. Own that.
And then for 50 years, every time that I played, if you didn't like what I did, you got to burn it like they did in Tulsa and like they did in Rosewood. How can you win? How can you win? You can't win. The game is fixed. So when they say, why do you burn down the community? Why do you burn down your own neighborhood? It's not ours. We don't own anything. We don't own anything.
We don't own anything. Do you hear the collectivism there? Do you hear the idea that it's not I don't own anything, it's we don't. So if there's a black business owner, but it's like now she's in on it, she owns part of his business because she's also black, like that's where this collectivist mindset takes you. So if there's not enough businesses that are owned by black people, then we don't own anything. But even if there are minority-owned businesses, their businesses got burned down too. Didn't matter. Because why? Because they're still contributing to the system, the white male patriarchy. So they made it so that they can't get ahead. At least the ones rioting. And this just leads to more division and destruction. She could very well own something. She could work her way up and own a business if she wanted to put all the sacrifice and work and perseverance into it. No one's stopping her from doing that. She could if she wanted to. So a lot of this is hyperbole to me. And what's happening? She's building up an emotional argument. So see where it goes. It's now she's using all the pain and anger she has as justification for burning down everything.
Trevor Noah said it so beautifully last night. There's a social contract that we all have, that if you steal or if I steal, then the person who is the authority comes in and they fix the situation. But the person who fixes the situation is killing us.
No, they're not. All right, so this is why I've never supported Colin Kaepernick. Like, hey, if there's a legitimate injustice and you want to kneel for the national flag, for the national anthem, like, I was fine with that. Kneeling to me is more respectful than maybe just acting like this or going like that or something. Like, kneeling, fine. I just disagreed with the whole premise because the facts weren't right. The fact is, you look at the stats. White people are killed by cops more than black people, and yet black people commit more of the violent crimes or suspected of. And so in interactions with police over particular crimes, it will be more black suspects, but the police are more reticent to shoot when it's a black suspect than a white suspect. So this idea the cops are after them, that the ones in authority who are supposed to fight against the injustice are killing you guys, is based off of false information, a false narrative that the media has been stoking up to the point where this is now what you believe. And it led to a whole summer of riots and destruction, of looting. There were more people murdered through the riots than there were people that the riots were based on. And the irony is just totally past them. They don't see how they actually did more harm than good with all their so-called peaceful protesting.
So the social contract is broken. And if the social contract is broken, why the do I give about burning football Hall of Fame, about burning Target? You broke the contract when you killed us in the streets and didn't give a. You broke the contract when for 400 years we played your game and built your wealth.
Plenty of people cared when George Floyd died. And the reality is, we don't even know if racism was a factor in how Officer Chauvin put his knee on his neck. We don't even know. We assume that because of how racist, race conscious we have become in the past several years. But we really don't know. So that just shows our own racism when we're so quick to see that if a white man hurts a black guy, that is because of racism. So there's the assumption there that all white people are malicious toward black people. But that's racism. That's ascribing ill intent to people just based on their skin color, when it could have been for multiple reasons. Poor training, that he's just a hothead in general. I mean, you look at Chauvin's record, and the dude seems like a hothead. He should have been let go a while ago, but because of the police unions, he gets shuffled around a bit. At least that's the way it seems to me. But I don't see anything there that showed actual racism. Maybe there was, but we jumped to that conclusion so quickly. And everyone was against it. Trump right away called it for an investigation into George Floyd's death. So people cared. We all cared. All right, there's very few people who are saying that George Floyd deserved to die, if anyone. Now, some people like, say, Candace Owens, who probably spoke out a little too soon, talking about his character and how we made him into this martyr type. Like, nah, don't go there, girl. But everyone was saying that no, he was mistreated for sure, and an investigation was called for. So don't tell me no one cared. All right. Now there's times where there's someone who's clearly being a criminal, and they're resisting arrest. People don't care as much when it comes to that. When they try to beat up the officer or take his gun, tase him, or pull out his gun or take a knife to an officer, those individuals don't get as much sympathy. Okay, but that's not based on race. That's based on you are committing a crime and you are the one violating the social contract in that moment.
You broke the contract when we built our wealth again, on our own, by our bootstraps in Tulsa, and you dropped bombs on us. You when we built it in Rosewood and you came in and you slaughtered us. You broke the contract, so your target. Your Hall of Fame. As far as I'm concerned, they could burn this to the ground. And it still wouldn't be enough. And they are lucky that what black people are looking for is equality and not revenge.
ACAB. You know what ACAB stands for? All cops are bastards. Is that a message you want to be putting out there? So there's my running commentary on the video, on the message in there, and on this insane attempt to justify the rioting, the looting, all the destruction that we've seen all summer and fall and just for months since George Floyd's death, which was a tragedy, which was totally unjust, which was totally preventable, even though we know that from the autopsy that he didn't die by the knee on the neck, but by the drug overdose and the asphyxiation from that. But I have a hard time believing that the knee on the neck didn't contribute in some significant way, as most of us would probably assume or conclude. So, yes, I think his death was totally avoidable if he was treated more carefully and sent to the hospital right away instead. But either way, what we've seen has been just nothing but insanity, as I think Black Lives Matter, the movement, has shown their true colors throughout this whole summer. And anyone who thinks that they're actually still protesting about real injustice, about real corruption and systemic racism, about real problems, I think they're kind of turning a blind eye to what their motives really are. Because ultimately they're not about correcting any true injustice or fixing any policies that favor one race over another. But they're using race and all of our emotional reactions to anything racially based to justify implementing the Marxist system, the one I've been talking about in multiple videos already. So I expected better of my friend. She works at an Ivy League university, and to have that, I mean, she's not an idiot. And so for her to present this argument as something that would convince me that the looting, that the rioting is somehow justified or understandable, or that I can have some sort of sympathy for them, that was ludicrous to me. So after seeing so much destruction and additional loss of life, I was just furious pretty much. So I tried very carefully to respond in so many words. So what I did tell her was, okay, here are some of my thoughts. This rant did not help legitimize her cause. If anything, it reinforces the view of the rioters as petulant children. It shows how much her subculture has been duped into materialism so much that they would steal and destroy their own neighborhoods and workplaces just for food or bling. That's human nature, and I think that's largely influenced by hip-hop culture, which places one's source of honor and prestige in materialism instead of education and virtues. Asterisk that, I'll get more into that in a moment. Okay. She brings up Tulsa and Rosewood as justification for believing they don't have any vested interest in their own economy and community. Seriously, she's bringing up these atrocities, I acknowledge they're atrocities, from nearly 100 years ago. There's no one alive who's lived through them. Yes, there are those who remember the civil rights movement, but how long are we going to keep looking to the past for grievances instead of moving forward? How far back do we want to play this game? Because all people at some point in history were subjugated by another group. No one has exclusive rights to claim victimhood status. Okay? How far back do we want to play this game? Because all people at some point in history have been subjugated by another group. This is the pointlessness of identity politics. We should be focusing on our shared citizenry and shared humanity. So that's what I told her. I could have went into it even more, but I left it at that. And then she said, this really, this really got me. She said, I appreciate your response, but I think you fail to take off the white lenses and try to see it from others' perspectives. You listen to respond instead of understand. How far back do we want to play this game? Since 1619 and then some. You don't have to respond again. Have a good morning. And I said, hey, if you don't want to continue a discussion, that's up to you, but please don't presume to know what kind of lens I have. And that was all I said because I was ready to really get into it there. I mean, I showed the video to my wife. She couldn't even finish watching it. Once she started trying to justify the riots and the looting, my wife's like, I don't want to hear the rest. It is garbage. So my wife got pissed when she saw her say that stuff. But right there, she just played right into the identity politics, trying to say that I have to remove my white lens. I'm like, you don't know what kind of lens I have. I grew up always being referred to as mixed race. When people ask me what I am, I always said I'm a mutt. I'm half Puerto Rican, quarter Scottish, quarter German, with a little Italian in me somewhere. He likes to come out sometimes. You know, I was proud of that. I'm proud of being mixed race or mixed heritage, ethnicity, and yet I'm 100% American. I'm proud of being American. But I never viewed myself as white because the area I lived in was very homogenous, very white. And I was like, well, I know I'm not like them. So if that's what white is, I'm not 100% white. I'm mixed, and that's okay. And people would know enough to look at me and be like, there's something off about you, or there's something different. What are you? So I didn't look like everyone else still, even though I'm a pretty light-skinned Puerto Rican. Even if I'm just half Puerto Rican, I'm still light-skinned, but there's enough about me that people could tell that I'm a little different. So, especially when I had this mustache started growing at age 10. So, but don't tell me I had a white lens. You don't know what lens I've had. So, right there, that's that labeling. That's that, okay, this is the perspective you have. Without knowing my experiences, not knowing what I've lived through, and what's informed my worldview. I don't say anything about her worldview, and even about the lady in the video. She tells us what her worldview is. So I want to do a commentary on this video because I do find that it's a really good example of so many of the things I've been talking about in my recent videos. Okay, so first, the honor-shame dynamics. Notice that she does not refer to herself as an actual individual, but just as a representative of a collective of all black people, all African Americans or Americans of African descent. Okay? America and the West in general is primarily, or at least historically, has been innocence-guilt as far as the different types of culture goes. Whereas the majority of the world is, especially the Southern Hemisphere and the Eastern cultures and Middle East are honor-shame cultures. And there's some subtypes within there as well, like power, fear, and purity, pollution, or contamination. But honor-shame is the main context that they are within. But when you get a culture like the United States that is the melting pot, or a bag of mixed nuts. Like, we're made up of multiple cultures from all around the world. Or even if you just take white America, within that there's a mixture because of all the different European ethnicities and heritages. So we're still a mix one way or the other, but then we've got people of African descent, people of Latin American descent, Asian, which is pretty mixed as well, Middle Eastern, so Native American, of course, or American Indian, First Nations, I don't care what they call themselves, so whichever they prefer. So we're such a mix, and so when you get such a mixed society, a very pluralistic society, what helps unite us or keep the social contract going is an innocent guilt culture, where, okay, we'll just make sure we have some external laws that we can all agree upon that set the norms, and as long as we can adhere to these rules, we can all get along. And so we'll base someone's standing on their adherence to the laws, not on sometimes some arbitrary aspect of group norm, because we can't all agree on what the norm should be for a particular group. So we got to figure out what are the norms that we can all agree on, and those are the laws that we're based on. So we judge people as individuals, not as group identities. And that is effective when we have a culture that is a mix of so many different cultures and backgrounds. We have to have some basics we all agree upon. So within our innocent guilt culture, that is sort of the veneer upon all these other cultures that are primarily based in honor shame. And what we've been seeing with this culture war are the honor shame dynamics now pushing up to the surface and fracturing, as we're seeing this critical theory question everything, question the fabric of the rules and the laws that have guided us and that have bound us together, the innocent guilt dynamics. We're seeing a fracturing of those, and it's like there's these roots below and these plants that are bursting through the ground, and these are the honor shame dynamics. But they've always been there. The reality is, when you've got this pluralistic society, you're going to see the honor dynamics at play when you look at subcultures. Because in a pluralistic society, we can find belonging in subgroups where we find more people who have something in common with us. So you see that in, say, Southern culture. There's a subculture there where there's honor-shame dynamics. You see it through family feuds that have played out throughout history. And you see it in hip-hop culture. And where did this video come from? World Star Hip-Hop. So within hip-hop culture, you see a lot of honor-shame dynamics. You know, what are some of the mantras that you hear? Ride or die. Snitches get stitches. Those are honor-shame words about loyalty, about commitment to the group over individual autonomy and privilege, just looking out to the group, not just for yourself. And as well as not looking to the law over the group. So being more loyal to the subculture than to the larger culture that's based in innocence-guilt. So we see the honor-shame dynamics play out right here in this video, where everything is about the collective. Everything's about the group. She's not looking as an individual. What can she do to get ahead? What can she do to support herself and make a better life for herself? No, everything is what can we do as an entire black community to get ahead. And she's not thinking in terms of where she is right now, 2020, but she's looking at the entire course of the history of her group identity. And you make that your starting place, you'll just get discouraged and resentful, bitter and angry, because there's going to be a whole slew of injustices against your group. But if you look at yourself as an individual, well, how many injustices did you experience that gives you all the resentment that you have? I don't know. I don't know about her. But I mean, here, I could play a clip from John McWhorter, who he sticks his neck out there and he says, the reality is, racism in this country is overblown right now. It's being exaggerated. And we keep pushing out this message that we're a racist society, but do we have the evidence to back that up? And I don't think so.
A great many black people are vastly exaggerating the extent to which racism touches their lives. And I know what happened to George Floyd. I know what happened to all of these people. And frankly, folks, I can take those statistics back to the 90s. I pay very close attention. However, the idea that to be a black person, including a black man, is to walk out into the streets and be ever at risk of being either abused by a cop or treated in a starkly inferior way by a white person is a lie. And I'm sorry to say that, but I think that an awful lot of Black people today are taught to pretend that that's the case out of a sense of allegiance with our race, out of a sense that white people need to be taught a lesson. And I get it. I can put myself in their heads. I try very hard to. But frankly, many people are thinking, what about what happened to George Floyd? And as I've said in the pages of Quillette, the idea that George Floyd died because he was Black isn't true. The facts don't support it. It looks like it. And if you had asked me even as recently as 4 years ago, I would have said that must be it. And I argued that with my sparring partner, Glenn Lowry. He and I disagreed about the cops. We're thought of as these apostates. But I always said with the cops, Glenn, there's no disagreement. But it's not true. For any death that you see like that, that the cops inflict on someone, and there is a problem with the cops, but I hate to say, it's not as racialized as people say. You have to remember that that same thing almost undoubtedly happened to a white person, often not long before, and we never heard about it. And so, what happened to George Floyd was absolutely egregious, but it had happened to Tony Timpa just 4 years before. And the common answer that Black people are killed disproportionately to our numbers, even that doesn't work. Because really what it comes down to is one, and I don't like talking about this because it's so unpleasant, it's about how much crime people commit. And unfortunately, for reasons I think we can all understand, Black men in particular commit a disproportionate amount of crime. That can't be denied. Or two, getting into problems with cops is also predicated on socioeconomics. More Black people are poor disproportionately, and that is a grievous error in our society in itself. But if you're poor, then you're more likely to have warrants, you're more likely to be armed, you're more likely to do all sorts of things through no fault of your own often. But that means that you're more likely to encounter the cops. Well, more Black people are poor. So what all this means is that the definition of the Black experience in the United States is not that for no reason whatsoever you go out into the streets and because white people don't like Black people, a cop might push you up against a wall and the cop might kill you. It's simply not true. And it's interesting, my friend John Wood, who is becoming somebody who's on the list of Black apostates lately. He knows his stuff. He grew up as a Black person in a disadvantaged Black community. He's not some buttoned up conservative elderly person. He's the shit. And he said that in his efforts to try to get the word out in the Black community that we need to think about something other than the occasional idiot cop who does something really bad, is that he says he talks to Black people who are very upset about the cops and he says, okay, so who do you know who got killed? And he can barely think of a time when anybody he spoke to, and he's spoken to a lot of people, said, well, I know somebody. Now, they all know somebody who was unfairly treated by a cop. The statistics show that the cops are a little meaner to Black people, and that's grievous in itself. But do they kill more Black people? They just don't. When you factor in criminal records, criminal behavior, and especially socioeconomics, it's just that the cops kill out of racism isn't there. So we're told that you can't know the Black experience, with the idea being that someone like me walks out into the streets and I have to goad myself against racist treatment. People exaggerate vastly. When you see on social media a middle class, especially Black person who says, I encounter racism every day, frankly, no, they don't. They're exaggerating. Do you encounter nasty treatment by the cops on a regular basis? It depends on your neighborhood. Do the cops kill you because you're Black? Frankly, no. Are the cops mean to you? That is something that we need to really, really work on. Is that the experience of most Black Americans in the United States? Once again, no evidence suggests that it does. And so, if white people bristle at that idea that if you are white, you can't say anything about race because you haven't had the experience, as if Black people now are Jews in Weimar Germany, it's a vast exaggeration. Nobody is consciously trying to manipulate. There's a very complex dynamic going on in the Black community where we're encouraged to have a certain sense of cultural fellowship, We are encouraged to not forget the people who we left behind. All of this is perfectly understandable, but unfortunately, a byproduct of it is that we are taught to exaggerate. It doesn't mean racism doesn't exist. I could give you some stories, but I'm going to stop here. But no, our experience is not what we're being told, and that includes with the cops and murder. And frankly, that untruth is at the heart of why the race discussion in the United States right now is at the impasse that it is.
And then another major value that comes out in this video is materialism. I've mentioned materialism in some of my older videos, and a little bit in my last video when I mentioned how I see the start of the sexual revolution actually going back to the Scopes monkey trial. That what that helped do was usher in more and more promotion of materialism. And there's two types of materialism, but they actually are united. We tend to think in the scientific world, materialism as just this idea that all that exists is matter, the physical world. And that's all that is. That's everything. And then there is the moral or like pop culture view of materialism that is all about that what matters most are things. Money, property, wealth, different things for pleasure, clothing, shoes, jewelry, your car, your house. That's materialism. Well, that is an extension of the philosophy of materialism, that all that really is what the physical world. It's a completely atheistic worldview. And so what you see is when that's all there is, well then all that's important is this life, this temporal, finite life. And that reminds me of something my old pastor at True North would say, Pastor Bob Levins, that the greatest sin of our generation is actually covetousness. Too often think it might be pride, and yeah, pride is terrible, and it might be racism, and it might be sexism or misogyny, but no. The greatest sin that we're seeing in our society is covetousness. The demand to have what someone else has. Because that's all we see that this life is about. And when you think that that's all that matters is the things you can get in this life, then you could feel justified in burning, looting, killing in order to get that stuff. And then what you see are all these cognitive distortions. I got into that when I teach students. It's one of the most frequent things I teach people in my counseling is the thinking errors, the distortions in our thoughts. And watch that video. See how many cognitive distortions you can identify. You've got all or nothing thinking, where is either you're poor to her, or you got all this bling. You got all these clothing and TVs and electronics. So there's no satisfaction or acceptance of the reality that most people are somewhere in between. So it's not either you're rich and you're flaunting wealth or you're broke. Most people are in between, and even the people in her community are somewhere in between. You see the fallacy of fairness, this idea that is kind of endemic to Marxism, that everyone should have the same amount. Well, here's the way it's going to play out. Not everyone's going to rise up to a higher amount. Everyone's going to be lowered to the most common denominator. That's all Marxism. It doesn't allow for incentives for people to excel. Capitalism does that. The idea that you can put effort in and achieve more, that you can compete with others, that gives people incentive to excel and produce more. But this idea that no, your wealth needs to be distributed to others, you need to share everything you have. Well, that doesn't give me incentive to work and strive for more. I mean, that totally dismisses the reality that people are not as altruistic as we wish they would be. We do have self-interest. Now, there is altruism, sure, but it usually boils down to caring for yourself, your family, and then your community. But what do you see within Black Lives Matter? They want to destroy the nuclear family. So they want the larger community to be your family, the state to be your family, the state being your mom and dad and everyone else, the subjects of the state to be your brothers and sisters, so that all your wealth that you generate goes to everyone, gets evenly distributed. That's the mentality behind the Marxist movement in Black Lives Matter, and in general with what we're seeing in the cultural war right now. So that fallacy of fairness, labeling. I mean, you see this all throughout, this idea that every white person is an oppressor, and everyone who's not white is a victim, just by default. Overgeneralizing. You see that all throughout her speech, that this is the way it's always going to be, that every time throughout history we try to succeed, someone's going to, the system, whoever they is going to bring us down. And yet you should point to recent examples, at least not enough evidence of a true trend. But she points to things from 100 years ago. And then she points to, say, what the media has been presenting as a trend, but when you look at the actual stats, we see that it's not. When it comes to the number of black individuals who die in police confrontations. We make it sound, because every time that happens, it makes national news, it makes it sound much worse than it actually is. So we also see within there how the media is magnifying an issue, which then, for people who don't employ critical thinking and do their own research, will then believe this narrative that they are constantly being threatened by the authorities, that their lives are constantly in danger. So there's also selective abstraction going on there. That one thing is being taken out of context and promoted, and we're not given the full context. We're never given the full story. Like, we're often given video clips. We're not given the whole statistics on the actual trends in crime and on police brutality or police using their firearms. And what do you see? The emotional reasoning. See her crying at the end. And you see my friend with her post. It's like, by her pain and her anger, you can tell this should give you some information on the reasoning for the riots and the protests. Like, that's not a rationale. Now you might be saying, well, Andrew, you're a therapist. Shouldn't you be more sensitive to all this? And no, because I'm a therapist, because I'm a therapist, my job is to help people integrate their emotions and their rational side. In dialectical behavioral therapy, we call that the wise mind, where you consider both the emotional mind and the rational mind. And in the intersect, the overlap is the wise mind. Emotional reasoning is when we allow our emotions to dictate to us what reality is. That is what determines what is true. If I feel scared, then I must be in danger. If I'm angry, then there must have been an injustice. But wait, we should listen to our emotions, but then use that as a clue to do more investigation for more evidence, for more reason, and then be informed by both reason and rationale and emotions. And when you do more investigating, you see, maybe the media has been stoking division by only presenting one side. Because when you look at, say, what happened to George Floyd, you would think that's awful, that must be racist. But did you know that police were also using that same procedure on white people? And yet when an officer killed a white guy using that same knee on the neck hold, that did not make national news. So why does one make national news but not the other? Could it be the media is being very selective with what they're putting out there to us? Maybe it would be wise for some of us to just unplug from the national news and get information from multiple sources and decide for ourselves what information is really worth investigating more into. Life for me has been a lot better since I disconnected my cable, and I have to do my own research on things. I don't just let the news from major corporations tell me what is actually going on in the world, but I still stay informed by looking up multiple things. So you see just an absence of critical thinking. And when this happens, we're manipulated by a narrative, then that I can totally understand why there's a victim mentality. So it promotes this idea of being persecuted constantly, then the paranoia of being hunted down by police and by just white society in general, that they're all guilty of being oppressors. And then, well, what does that do? That helps foster resentment and then rage and then revenge. It's the irony of her saying that you're lucky black people just want equality, not revenge. Really? What is all the burning and looting and destruction for? That's revenge. If you believe that the whole system is against you, you're going to destroy stuff. So no, it's not equality. Unless you want us all equally to be living in squalor and in ruins, then I guess so. So yeah, in this video you see a nice sampling of the culture war and the twisted logic used to justify more and more atrocities and just total crazy making. It's like, this is from, I have to put this in context, a friend who went to college, has a college education where we're supposed to learn critical thinking, and is working. She has a master's, and she's working at an Ivy League university. Believe that this video was worth watching? Really? You think that this person is presenting a sound argument? No, there's holes all in her logic. It's all just emotional reasoning and distorted thinking. So, sorry if I don't sound very sensitive, but we need to be clear-headed. We need to think carefully about stuff going forward. Anyway, so I might make some enemies out of this video, but it's not because I want to see more division. It's actually the opposite of what like I said in my text to her back, was we need to be focused on our shared humanity, our shared citizenry as Americans, especially as Christians. As brothers and sisters in Christ, we need to stand together, unified, and be aligned with Christ, and then that aligns us with so many other brothers and sisters of different ethnicities and skin colors and male and female and different backgrounds and experiences. We don't ally with them based on those things. We ally with them based on our unity with Christ. That is integrity. So when Jesus prayed that we would all be one, he wasn't praying that we would all be unified with people just because of the sake of unity, but no, that we would be one through integrity. That if we're united with him, naturally we would then be united together because we're in adherence to the gospel. And that's what I want to see. I don't want to see any more division based on identity politics. That's a world's ways of resolving grievances. But the gospel's way is through true reconciliation and bringing in an order, God's kingdom, to this earth. So I mean no offense to anyone. I know this might trigger people either way, no matter what I say. And I'm not discounting any injustice others may have experienced. But the reality is we need to push toward real solutions and healing and taking personal responsibility for our actions and not seeking out justification to burn, loot, riot. But see what we can do. Like Jordan Peterson says, clean your room. Get your own life in order before you criticize the world. And then maybe we'll actually see a difference. Okay. As usual, join in the comment section. Like, share, subscribe, and just because you never know what might happen as far as censorship goes. So if you want to make sure you're in touch with me in case I have to move to another platform, you can email me and be part of my email list so that I can keep you informed when I make any changes. But that said, I will be on Library and Odyssey soon. I'm starting to upload things there. The transfer did not bring over any videos that were over an hour long, though. So some of my older videos that were really long just didn't make it. But I hope to see you on other platforms as well. Okay, God bless.